The denial of Peter. When the soldiers and temple guards, with the arrested Jesus in their midst, approached the entrance of Annas's palace, the apostle John walked beside the Roman captain. Judas walked somewhere at the back, while Simon Peter followed at a distance. Just before the palace gate, the entire procession halted and reorganized. Jesus was led into the courtyard by the guards, and John followed them inside. Judas stood by the gate, but when he saw Jesus and John going inside, he felt so uncomfortable that he decided to walk back to Jerusalem with the temple guard. Back in the city, he went to the house of Caiaphas, where later, as he knew, the actual trial would take place. Peter, who had followed the whole procession, wanted to stay close to Jesus, and he cautiously approached. In the crowd, he went unnoticed and hesitantly walked toward the gate, but he didn't dare to go inside. However, John saw him just as Jesus was being led into the palace. When everyone was in the courtyard, and most of the Roman soldiers and temple guards had left for Jerusalem, John made a big mistake. He knew Peter was standing outside the gate, and he knew the doorkeeper, who had guarded the gate since the time his family had often stayed at Annas's palace. He felt sorry for Peter and asked the doorkeeper to let Peter in. The doorkeeper fulfilled his request. When Peter walked into the courtyard and the gate closed behind him, he was, as it were, trapped. He didn't know where he was, and he didn't know any of the others present. Feeling lost, he walked toward a charcoal fire to warm himself because the night was chilly. He felt completely out of place among the temple guards who had just arrested Jesus, and indeed, he was out of place. Jesus had not instructed him to stay near, as he had requested John. Peter should have been with the other apostles, who had been explicitly warned not to endanger their lives during this period of the trial and crucifixion of their master. Shortly before reaching the entrance of the palace, Peter had thrown away his sword, so he entered the courtyard of Annas unarmed. His thoughts were utterly confused. He could hardly believe that Jesus had been arrested. He wondered what the other apostles were doing and pondered how it was that John had access to the palace and why the gate was later opened for him. Shortly after the doorkeeper had let Peter in, she approached him while he was warming himself by the fire and said teasingly, "Aren't you also one of that man's disciples?" The woman suspected this because the apostle John had asked her to let Peter in. Peter was in such a tense, nervous state that this identification as a disciple threw him off balance. Filled with only one thought, that he must get away alive, he promptly answered the woman's question with, "No, I am not." Shortly afterward, a temple guard who was also standing by the fire asked Peter, "Didn't I see you in the garden when we arrested this man? Aren't you one of his followers?" Peter became seriously alarmed. He saw no chance of escaping safely from these accusers, so he strongly denied any connection with Jesus, saying, "I have never had anything to do with this man. I don't even know him." Immediately after, the doorkeeper took Peter aside and said, "I'm sure you belong to Jesus. One of his followers asked to have you let in, and my sister, who is standing there, saw you last week in the company of Jesus at the temple. Why do you deny this?" Peter felt cornered by the doorkeeper and panicked. The only escape he could quickly think of was to overrule this woman very harshly. He cursed roughly and told her to leave him alone, swearing that he didn't know Jesus at all, and said again, "I am not a follower of this man. I don't even know him. I've never even heard of him." The woman backed off, frightened. Peter moved away from the fire for a while and walked around the courtyard. He would have liked to leave, but he was too afraid of drawing attention. As he began to feel cold again, he returned to the fire, where one of the men standing with him said, "You must be a follower of this man. This Jesus is a Galilean, and from the way you speak, you must be from there too." And again, Peter denied any connection with his master. Peter feared for his life, and he was now so distressed that he tried to avoid contact with his accusers by moving away from the fire and isolating himself in an antechamber. There he sat for over an hour, alone, when the doorkeeper and her sister happened upon him by chance. Whereupon both once again accused him in a mocking tone of being a follower of Jesus. And again he denied this accusation. Just as he once more denied any relationship with Jesus, the rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the warning words that the master had spoken to him earlier that same night. As he stood there, full of sorrow and crushed by guilt, the doors of the palace opened, and Peter saw Jesus being led out to go on his way to the house of Caiaphas. As the master passed Peter, Jesus saw the expression of despair on his apostle's face by the light of the torches. Jesus turned his head toward Peter and looked at him. Peter never forgot that look as long as he lived. It was a look of intense compassion mixed with unconditional love, such as no mortal on earth had ever seen on the face of Jesus. When Jesus and the guards had left the palace gate, Peter followed them, but only for a short distance. He could go no further. He sat down by the roadside and wept bitterly. After shedding these tears of unbearable pain, he made his way back to the camp, hoping to find his brother Andrew there. But when he arrived at the camp, he found only David Zebedee, who sent Peter with a courier to the place in Jerusalem where his brother had found refuge. Everything Peter experienced took place in the courtyard of Annas's palace on the Mount of Olives. He did not follow Jesus to the palace of Caiaphas, the high priest. The fact that Peter realized he had denied the master multiple times when the rooster crowed shows that all this took place outside Jerusalem, since it was not legally allowed to keep poultry within the city walls. Until the moment the rooster's crowing brought him to his senses, Peter, while pacing back and forth in the antechamber to stay warm, had only thought about how cleverly he had fended off the servants' accusations and thwarted their intent to identify him as a follower of Jesus. For the time being, he only considered that these servants had neither the moral nor legal right to question him in this way, and he genuinely congratulated himself on how he believed he had avoided being identified and possibly arrested and imprisoned. It was only when the rooster crowed that the thought occurred to Peter that he had denied the master. Only when Jesus looked at him did he realize that he had not behaved according to his privileges as an ambassador of the kingdom. Once he had taken the first step on the path of compromise and least resistance, Peter saw no other option but to continue on this course he had chosen. One must have a strong and noble character to turn back and choose the right path when one has taken the wrong one. All too often, a person's thoughts tend to justify continuing on the path of error once it has been taken. Peter could not fully believe he could be forgiven until after the resurrection, when he met his master and saw that he received him in exactly the same way as before the experiences of that tragic night of denials.